There is a generation that rarely speaks loudly about its struggles, yet psychologically carries one of the heaviest developmental imprints of modern history. A generation shaped not by constant reassurance, but by adaptation. Not by emotional overexposure, but by emotional self-management. This is Generation X, individuals born roughly between the mid-1960s and 1980, and from a psychological standpoint, they represent one of the most internally resilient yet emotionally complex cohorts in contemporary society. To truly understand the psychology of Generation X, we must begin with the environment that shaped their formative years. Developmental psychology consistently emphasizes that a child's early environment profoundly influences emotional regulation, attachment style, and cognitive coping patterns. Many Gen X children grew up during a period marked by rising divorce rates, increasing dual-income households, and a cultural shift toward independence at younger ages. In practical terms, this meant less supervision, fewer emotionally guided conversations, and greater exposure to self-directed problem-solving during childhood. This early independence was not merely a social experience, it was a neurological training ground. When children repeatedly navigate challenges alone, the brain adapts by strengthening internal coping mechanisms. Over time, this fosters a psychological profile characterized by self-reliance, emotional containment, and pragmatic decision-making. Unlike generations raised in highly monitored and emotionally expressive environments, Gen X individuals often learn to process distress internally rather than externally. From a clinical perspective, this does not indicate emotional absence, but rather an early development of autonomous emotional regulation. It is also important to recognize that emotional self-regulation developed under necessity often evolves into a lifelong psychological pattern. Many Gen X adults display a calm exterior in stressful situations, not because they are unaffected, but because their nervous systems were conditioned to remain functional during uncertainty. Their childhoods coincided with significant social and economic transitions, and chronic exposure to unpredictability tends to produce what psychologists refer to as adaptive resilience. This form of resilience is less about optimism and more about endurance, the ability to continue operating despite emotional strain. Another psychologically significant factor in the Gen X experience is the cultural messaging surrounding emotional expression. During their upbringing, emotional discourse was often limited, and stoicism was frequently encouraged. Phrases that emphasized strength, endurance, and self-sufficiency were common in many households. Over time, this environment reinforced controlled emotional expression. As adults, many Gen X individuals feel emotions deeply, yet choose to express them selectively. Their emotional world is not shallow, it is contained, filtered, and internally processed before being shared. From an attachment perspective, this pattern may manifest as a blend of independence and guarded vulnerability. Because many Gen X children learned early that emotional needs might not always be immediately met, they often developed a secure sense of personal responsibility alongside a cautious approach to trust. They are not inherently distrustful, but they are observant. They tend to evaluate consistency, authenticity, and behavioral patterns before forming deep emotional bonds. This psychological caution is frequently misinterpreted as detachment, when in reality it reflects adaptive emotional discernment. Furthermore, Generation X matured during a period of rapid societal transformation, including technological shifts, economic fluctuations, and evolving institutional trust. Exposure to systemic instability during developmental years often enhances critical thinking and skepticism. Psychologically, repeated encounters with uncertainty reduce blind trust in authority structures and increase reliance on independent judgment. This is why many Gen X individuals demonstrate a strong preference for authenticity, practicality, and evidence-based thinking over trends or external validation. Their sense of identity was largely formed before the rise of digital validation systems such as social media. Consequently, their self-concept tends to be more internally anchored rather than externally reinforced. In psychological terms, this internal locus of evaluation contributes to emotional stability, but it may also reduce the tendency to seek external emotional support. Many Gen X adults are comfortable handling personal challenges privately, not because they reject connection, but because their developmental conditioning emphasized self-sufficiency as the primary coping strategy. Another crucial psychological dimension of Generation X is their relationship with stress. Rather than exhibiting overt emotional reactions, they often display functional endurance. This behavioral pattern aligns with what psychologists describe as controlled stress processing, where individuals compartmentalize emotional distress in order to maintain productivity and stability. While this strategy is highly effective in professional and crisis-oriented environments, it may also lead to delayed emotional processing over time. Interestingly, this generation also embodies a paradox that is deeply relevant in psychological analysis. They value independence intensely, yet simultaneously appreciate meaningful and loyal relationships. Early autonomy does not eliminate the human need for connection. Instead, it reshapes how connection is expressed. Many Gen X individuals prioritize depth over frequency in relationships. They may not engage in constant emotional disclosure, but they often demonstrate care through reliability, responsibility, and long-term commitment. Their emotional language is frequently behavioral rather than verbal. In interpersonal dynamics, this can result in a quiet but consistent presence. They may not always articulate emotional reassurance explicitly, yet they show support through action, stability, and problem-solving. From a psychological standpoint, this reflects instrumental caregiving, a form of emotional expression rooted in practical support rather than overt sentiment. This pattern is especially visible in their parenting and leadership styles, where guidance is often subtle, structured, and grounded in life preparedness. Moreover, the transitional nature of their generational experience, bridging an analog childhood and a digital adulthood, has further shaped their cognitive flexibility. Neuropsychologically, adapting across multiple societal paradigms strengthens adaptive cognition, allowing individuals to navigate change with less psychological disruption. This contributes to their reputation as grounded, realistic, and solution-oriented thinkers. It is essential to emphasize that Generation X is not emotionally distant in the clinical sense. Rather, they are emotionally disciplined. Their psychological architecture reflects years of internal processing, environmental adaptation, and culturally reinforced resilience. What may appear as silence is often reflection. What may appear as detachment is often measured emotional control. What may appear as toughness is frequently the result of early psychological independence. Ultimately, the psychology of Generation X is best understood through the lens of adaptive development. They were not raised in an era of constant emotional amplification, but in one that required quiet adjustment and personal responsibility. This produced adults who are resilient, observant, self-regulated, and deeply pragmatic. Beneath their composed exterior often lies a rich internal emotional landscape shaped by experience, endurance, and thoughtful self-reliance. Understanding this generation psychologically allows us to move beyond stereotypes and toward a more nuanced perspective. Generation X is not defined by emotional suppression, but by emotional management. Not by disconnection, but by selective vulnerability. And not by indifference, but by a form of resilience that was cultivated long before emotional awareness became a cultural norm. In many ways, their psychology represents a bridge between survival-oriented upbringing and modern emotional consciousness, a balance of strength, introspection, and quietly sustained emotional depth. Generation X reminds us that strength is not always loud, and resilience is not always visible. Psychologically, they embody quiet endurance, internal regulation, and deeply rooted independence shaped by their environment and experiences. Understanding their mindset helps us better appreciate the subtle ways human beings adapt, cope, and grow across generations. If you found this psychological deep dive insightful, subscribe to the Inner Mind Psychology for more rich, research-based explorations of human behavior, emotional patterns, and the hidden workings of the mind. Here, we don't just explain psychology, we simplify it, deepen it, and make it meaningful for everyday life.